I was working the front I was working the front desk at a hostel in Amsterdam when an American guest came down at 6 in the morning. She was holding her phone charger and looked genuinely upset. She asked me why European outlets were broken. I told her they weren't broken, they just used a different plug type. She stared at me like I'd just told her gravity worked backwards here. She said that didn't make sense because electricity was electricity. I handed her an adapter. She looked at it, then back at me, and asked why Europe couldn't just fix their outlets to match American ones. I explained that most of the world uses 220 volts and different plug shapes. She asked how Europe expected tourists to charge their phones. I pointed to the adapter in her hand. My co-worker in Barcelona told me about a family that tried to tip their waiter 50 euros after a 30-euro meal. The waiter politely refused. The dad got louder, insisting the waiter take it. He thought the waiter was being rude by saying no. Other diners started staring. The mom finally asked if Spanish servers were offended by tips. The waiter explained that service was included in the bill and that over-tipping could actually be seen as awkward or patronizing. The dad looked confused. He said that back home, not tipping meant terrible service. The waiter smiled and said, "This wasn't back home. I had a friend who managed a hotel in Prague." An American couple checked in and immediately asked where the ice machine was. My friend said they didn't have one. The husband asked how they were supposed to keep their drinks cold. My friend offered to bring ice from the bar. The wife asked why hotels in Europe didn't just install ice machines like normal places. My friend explained that most Europeans don't use ice the way Americans do. The husband said that was weird. He spent the rest of his stay complaining about lukewarm water. Another guest in Munich asked me why the date on his train ticket was wrong. It said 15/09/2024. He insisted he'd booked it for September 15th, not the 15th month. I explained that Europe writes dates as day, month, year. He said that was backwards. I told him it was actually how most of the world did it. He said America had 300 million people, so that should count for something. I printed his ticket again with the same date format. He took it and muttered something about European calendars being confusing. These moments happen every single day. Americans abroad run into tiny differences that somehow feel enormous. It's not about being ignorant. It's about suddenly realizing that all the small things you thought were universal are actually just American. The outlets, the tipping, the ice, the dates. None of it translates. And when you've spent your whole life thinking your way is the default, finding out it's not can feel like a plot twist. So here are more stories about Americans discovering that the world has other ideas about how things should work. I worked at a train station information desk in Brussels for 2 years. An American tourist once asked me which platform the train to Paris was on. I told him platform 7. He asked what time it left. I said 14:30. He stared at me. He asked what that meant. I said 2:30 p.m. He asked why I didn't just say that. I explained that Europe uses 24-hour time. He said that seemed unnecessarily complicated. I told him it actually prevented AM-PM confusion. He said he'd never been confused by AM and PM in his life. Then he missed his train because he showed up at 2:30 a.m. the next morning. He came back to my desk very tired and asked why the station had such weird hours. A woman in Vienna asked me how to convert kilometers to miles in her head. I suggested multiplying by 0.6. She asked if I had a chart. I said most cars and phones showed both. She said hers didn't. She'd rented a car and spent the whole day thinking she was driving 30 miles per hour on the highway. She couldn't figure out why everyone kept honking and passing her aggressively. When she realized 30 kilometers per hour was only about 18 miles per hour, she got embarrassed. She said the metric system didn't make intuitive sense. I asked her what a foot was based on. She said a foot. I asked whose foot. She changed the subject. My cousin worked at a car rental place in Dublin. An American customer asked for an automatic transmission. My cousin said they only had manuals available. The customer asked how people in Ireland drove without automatics. My cousin said they learned to drive manual. The customer said that seemed old-fashioned. My cousin explained that most of Europe preferred manual cars because they were cheaper and more fuel efficient. The customer asked what the third pedal was for. My cousin spent 20 minutes explaining clutch control. The customer eventually took a taxi instead. I met a guy in Copenhagen who tried to pay for a coffee with a $50 bill. The barista said they only took Danish kroner or cards. He asked why they didn't accept dollars. The barista said because they were in Denmark. He said dollars were universal currency. The barista said they really weren't. He asked where the nearest place to exchange money was. The barista pointed to a bank 2 blocks away. He said that seemed inconvenient. The barista suggested using a credit card. He said he didn't trust European card readers. He left without coffee. A family in Rome asked their tour guide why all the buildings were so old. The guide said because Rome was an ancient city. The dad said that in America, old buildings got torn down and replaced with new ones. The guide explained that in Europe, historical buildings were preserved as cultural heritage. The daughter asked if that meant Romans just lived in old houses forever. The guide said many people did, yes. The mom said that seemed unsanitary. The guide looked tired. She'd been doing tours for 15 years and had heard this exact conversation at least 100 times. I was helping a traveler in Frankfurt find her connecting flight. She asked why the airport was so big and confusing. I explained that Frankfurt was one of Europe's largest hubs. She said American airports were easier to navigate. I asked which American airport she meant. She said all of them. I mentioned that many travelers found American airports equally confusing. She disagreed. She said at least American airports had signs in English. I pointed to the English signs all around us. She said they were too small. Another traveler in London asked me why British plugs had 3 prongs instead of 2. I said it was a safety feature that included a grounding pin and built-in fuse. He said American plugs worked fine without all that. I explained that the UK system was actually considered one of the safest in the world. He said it seemed over-engineered. I asked if he'd ever been electrocuted by an American outlet. He said no. I said that was kind of the point of over-engineering. A student in Berlin asked me why Europeans walked so much. I said, because cities were designed for walking and public transit. She said that in America, everyone just drove. I mentioned that many European city centers were car-free zones. She asked how people got groceries. I said they walked to local shops or took trams. She said that sounded exhausting. I told her most Europeans didn't think twice about it. She said she missed her car. She'd been in Berlin for 3 days. I worked at a restaurant in Paris for 5 years. An American couple once asked for the check immediately after ordering their food. I explained that in France, meals were meant to be leisurely experiences. The husband said they had plans later. I told them their food would take at least 30 minutes. The wife asked why French restaurants were so slow. I said they weren't slow. They were intentional. The husband asked if we could rush it. I said the kitchen worked at one pace. They ate quickly and left a €20 tip on a €40 bill. My manager told me to return it. I chased them down the street. They looked confused and slightly offended. A guest at a dinner party in Stockholm asked why everyone took their shoes off at the door. The host explained it was Swedish custom to keep homes clean. The guest said that in America, people kept their shoes on unless the host specifically asked. The host said in Sweden, it was just assumed. The guest asked what to do if your socks had holes. The host offered slippers. The guest said this felt overly formal for a casual dinner. Every other guest was already barefoot in the living room. My friend managed a cafe in Zurich. An American ordered a coffee at 7 p.m. and started talking loudly on his phone. Other customers kept looking over. My friend asked him to lower his voice. He asked why. My friend explained that Swiss culture valued quiet public spaces, especially in the evening. He said he wasn't being that loud. My friend said that by Swiss standards, he was. He asked if Switzerland had laws against talking. My friend said no, just unspoken social rules. He stayed on the phone, but whispered aggressively for the next 10 minutes. A woman in Athens asked her server why her salad didn't come with dressing on it. The server said Greek salads were traditionally dressed simply with olive oil and lemon. She asked for ranch. The server said they didn't have ranch. She asked for any creamy dressing. The server offered yogurt. She made a face. She said she'd just eat it plain. The server watched as she picked around the olives and feta. She told her friends later that Greek food was overrated. I was at a pub in Edinburgh when an American tourist asked the bartender for ice water. The bartender gave him a small glass with 2 ice cubes. The tourist asked for a refill and more ice. The bartender refilled it with the same amount of ice. The tourist asked why UK drinks didn't come with lots of ice like in America. The bartender said that in Britain, people preferred to actually taste their drinks rather than dilute them. The tourist said he just liked cold water. The bartender said the water was already cold. This went back and forth 3 more times. A family in Brussels asked their waiter why their meal took so long. The waiter said they'd been seated for 20 minutes. The dad said that in America, food came out in 10. The waiter explained that Belgian restaurants cooked food fresh to order. The mom asked if they could get ketchup for the fries. The waiter looked personally hurt. He said Belgian fries were served with mayo or special sauces. The daughter said ketchup was normal. The waiter brought ketchup, but placed it on the table like it was a small tragedy. I had a roommate from Ohio who moved to Copenhagen. She couldn't understand why Danish grocery stores were so small. I explained that Danes shopped more frequently for fresh ingredients instead of doing big weekly hauls. She said that seemed inefficient. I said it meant fresher food and less waste. She said she didn't have time to shop every day. I told her that most people stopped by on their way home from work. She said American supermarkets made more sense. 2 months later, she admitted she liked the freshness. But she still missed bulk buying. An American exchange student in Florence asked me why Italians ate dinner so late. I said because that's when Italians ate dinner. He said that in America, dinner time was around 6. I explained that in Italy, dinner often started at 9 or later. He said that felt like a midnight snack. I told him that Italians also had lighter lunches and afternoon breaks. He said his stomach couldn't adjust. He ended up eating pizza alone at 5:30 every evening while the city was still closed for siesta. I taught English in Poland for a year. An American student asked me if Poland was part of Russia. I said no, Poland was its own country. She said she thought everything over there was kind of the same. I explained that Poland had a distinct history, language, and culture. She asked if they spoke Russian. I said they spoke Polish. She asked what the difference was. I told her they were completely different languages from different language families. She said that seemed confusing for one region. I reminded her that Europe had dozens of countries and languages in an area smaller than the United States. She said that was too many. A tourist in Amsterdam asked me if Holland and the Netherlands were the same thing. I explained that Holland was a region within the Netherlands. He asked why people called it both. I said it was like calling the United States Dakota. He said that didn't make sense. I agreed. He asked if Amsterdam was the capital. I said yes. He asked if I was sure because he'd heard it might be The Hague. I explained that The Hague was the government seat, but Amsterdam was the constitutional capital. He said Europe made things too complicated. I told him the American Electoral College was also pretty complicated. He didn't see the connection. My friend worked at a museum in Berlin. An American visitor asked her when Germany became a country. My friend said 1871 for unification, then 1990 after reunification. The visitor asked what the difference was. My friend explained the whole history of East and West Germany. The visitor said she'd thought Germany had always been one place. My friend showed her the Berlin Wall exhibit. The visitor asked if the wall was real or just for tourists. My friend said it was very real and that pieces of it still stood around the city. The visitor took a selfie and asked if Germany was still kind of communist. My friend needed a break after that. A couple in Vienna asked their guide why Austria wasn't part of Germany. The guide explained that Austria was a separate country with its own identity. The husband said, but they both spoke German. The guide said that Canada and the US both spoke English, but were different countries. The wife asked if Austrians considered themselves German. The guide said absolutely not. The husband asked about Hitler. The guide's smile disappeared. She gave a very thorough history lesson about annexation and World War II. The couple stopped asking questions. I met someone in Prague who asked if Czechoslovakia still existed. I said it had split into the Czech Republic and Slovakia in 1993. He asked why. I gave him the short version about peaceful separation and national identity. He said it seemed like a lot of trouble. I said both countries seemed happy with the arrangement. He asked which one Prague was in. I said the Czech Republic. He asked if people were Czech or Czechoslovakian. I said Czech or Slovak depending on which country. He said he'd just call everyone Eastern European. I suggested he not do that. A student in Athens asked me why Greeks didn't just speak English, since so many tourists visited. I explained that Greek was their native language and had thousands of years of history. She said, but wouldn't it be easier? I asked if Americans should switch to Mandarin since more people spoke it worldwide. She said that was different. I asked how. She said because America was important. I told her Greece literally invented democracy and Western philosophy. She said that was a long time ago. The conversation ended there. An American at a pub in Dublin asked why Irish people cared so much about British history. An Irish regular explained centuries of colonization and conflict. The American said that was all in the past. The regular said it shaped modern Ireland entirely. The American said people should just move on. The regular asked if Americans had moved on from 9/11. The American said that was different. The regular took his drink and sat somewhere else. I worked at a bookstore in Madrid. A customer asked if we had books in normal language. I asked what she meant. She said English. I told her this was Spain, and most of our books were in Spanish. She said that international stores usually carried English versions. I showed her our small English section. She asked why it was so small. I explained that in Spain, people read Spanish. She said she'd just assumed everyone read English. I told her that English speakers made up only about 15% of the world. She looked genuinely surprised. I was back at that hostel in Amsterdam a year later. Different guests, same questions. Someone asked why Dutch bikes didn't have gears. Someone else asked why restaurants didn't do free refills. Another person wanted to know why the beds were so firm. I answered each question the same way I'd answered hundreds before. It's not that these things are wrong, they're just different. And different feels wrong when you're used to one way being the only way. The thing about traveling is that it flips your perspective. Suddenly, you're the odd one out. Your normal is someone else's strange. Your common sense is their confusion. And if you're lucky, you start to realize that maybe your way isn't the default. Maybe it's just one option in a world full of options. Maybe the metric system makes more sense mathematically, even if you grew up with feet and inches. Maybe 24-hour time prevents mistakes, even if you're used to AM and PM. Maybe not every restaurant needs ice machines and free refills. The stories keep coming because the surprises keep happening. Every day, someone discovers that light switches flip the opposite direction in the UK. That siesta is a real thing in Spain. That you can't just drive across Europe like you drive across Texas because there are borders and languages and toll systems that change every few hours. That not everywhere has air conditioning. That washing machines go in kitchens sometimes. That pharmacies are actually useful and pharmacists know things. None of this makes anyone wrong. It just makes everyone human. We all grow up thinking our normal is the normal. Then we leave home and find out that normal is local. The world is big and weird and full of people doing things their own way for their own reasons. And sometimes those reasons make more sense than what we're used to. Sometimes they don't. But they're always worth understanding. I still work at that hostel sometimes. I still hand out adapters. I still explain date formats and military time and why the cereal aisle is so small. And every time someone looks confused, I remember that I was confused once too. We all were. That's the whole point of traveling. To be confused, to ask questions, to learn that your way isn't the only way. And maybe, if you're really paying attention, to figure out which ways actually work better. And trust me, these stories